Trump's new $100,000 fee for H1B visa applicants is supposed to give Americans more jobs. It's supposed to bring back the work to the US. That's what they're saying anyway. In this video, we're going to talk about why the reality is that might not actually be the case. And we're going to show you some of the economic problems that this bill is actually going to introduce, both in the US and all around the world.
Welcome to Entrepreneur Expat. This is Justin. I'm Amanda. And on this channel, we talk all about doing business internationally, how to diversify yourself or your assets globally, how to make money from anywhere in the world, and so much more. So if that's something that you're interested in, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single video we have coming out on this channel. As you can see, we finally got our set up. So we are on a roll with bringing you content every single week. We've got emails, we've got messages, we've got Instagram DMs coming in every single day. We're trying to do our best to answer all of them. So you're definitely going to want to make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And for those of you who have over $1 million in liquid assets or more, we can help you relocate to another country. We can help you find investment opportunities in other countries. For example, we're in Mexico right now, which is booming. And all you need to do is apply to work with us. Go to entrepreneurexpat.com/consult. And if you don't have $1 million in net worth yet, do not worry. We have a bunch of resources for you as well, which you can find in the description below. It'll help you with anything from relocating yourself and finding the best countries for you to making enough money online to be able to be approved for visas all over the world.
All right, well, for those of you that maybe haven't heard the news or haven't been following the news too much, believe me, we try not to get too involved in US news and politics and everything else just for our own sanity. But everybody, Amanda, is talking about this H1B visa bill that just passed. Employers are going to need to pay $100,000 for every single new applicant that they have. If you don't know too much about the H1B visa, essentially what it does is it allows US-based companies to hire foreigners. A lot of the time they're from countries like India that have a lot of very sophisticated tech knowledge and things like that. And they'll hire those workers. They'll come to the US. The company will sponsor their visa. So there was a relatively small in pre-bill, new bill times, fee that the employer would have to pay in order to be able to sponsor that new employee's visa. And then that employee would come from India or China or Pakistan or wherever else to the US to live in the US. And that was that. Now, what's kind of changed now as of this bill?
So from my understanding, the bill was being presented as, Trump's kind of America first kind of battle cry.
Which sounds really good, right?
Yeah.
It sounds really good. We're going to bring the jobs back. We're focusing on Americans. Let's bring back the white collar work to the US.
The problem is that that's not exactly that simple in terms of how it's going to work out. It's definitely going to have an effect on the US economy. And Donald Trump, and not just Donald Trump, but whoever's running the US government, all of them seem to keep forgetting that the world has changed in some really major ways. So I think America first, like you said, it sounds really great on paper, but when you take into account the fact that we're in a multipolar world, China is nipping at the US's feet when it comes to technology. Companies in the United States are going to find a way to circumvent the visa anyway.
Of course.
It probably is not what the American people might be expecting. And that's kind of what we wanted to cover in this episode today, because since we follow what goes on in different countries and we follow economies in different countries and we just see things and how they're shifting and moving all around the world and changing, we thought it was important to talk about it and bring it up.
Absolutely. And I'll preface what we're about to go into with the fact that this is not just our opinion or something that we looked up right before making this video. We've been seeing the trends actively happen here in Mexico with outsourcing and nearshoring and things like that. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that's going to occur even more and more. So as an example, we lived for about 3 years in Guadalajara, Mexico, which is about an hour and a half from where we currently are in the Lake Chapala area. We got a cool lake view behind us. It's a little bit more calm here than in Guadalajara. We're kind of left the hustle and bustle of the city. But when we were in the city, we saw a lot of international people coming in from everywhere, and especially India. So companies, both Mexican and also foreign companies, will be hiring these Indian workers. We'd see them everywhere. I mean, I bought things off an Indian couple on Facebook Marketplace, and you see them at, there's a lot of Indian restaurants now that are popping up all around
Yeah,
Guadalajara, including our neighborhood.
one of the immigration attorneys we work with for ourselves and also for our clients had mentioned to me, hey, some of the visas that were like that they're processing the most is actually from India. So what does this mean? What is actually going on? I think the first thing that comes to mind is like these jobs are not going to go to Americans. Oh, you just did a video on how companies can actually circumvent the whole visa by, for example, either hiring people remotely or, for example, like nearshoring for tech jobs, so they can hire
Absolutely.
people and bring them to Mexico, which seems to be part of
Why would
what's
you
going
want to
on.
pay double or triple the salary of somebody, or at least, I mean, double digit percent more, just to be able to keep pace with the cost of living in the US? Then on top of it, pay all the different government fees, deal with all the red tape in the US. In some cases, there were visas, H1B visas, even before this new bill, that were processing for years, literally multiple years before they finally had somebody that's a new employee approved to come into that company and get their visa in the US.
Yeah.
You can't run a business like that. There's too much unpredictability. As a business owner, I mean, we've both been business owners for decades independently, and you can't run a business where the government is constantly giving you all of this red tape. It just does not work.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you spent some time in tech, you've also managed, developers and tech companies from multiple countries at one point. I think one of the things or one of the arguments against this policy with the H1B visa is that the talent that is needed for this type of work just does not exist in the United States, or it's too expensive for the company. So I'd like to
Mm-hmm.
hear your opinion on that since you spent some time in that space.
It's a little of both, really. So what we've seen is that when you look at the programs, like the ones that were spearheaded by Bill Gates and Microsoft, they were, instead of training Americans, when we were building the internet and when computers were really coming into play in the last couple decades here, and now getting into more advanced technologies like AI, a lot of the training has been done overseas because companies thought that they could just outsource those jobs and hire really cheap talent overseas instead of really training their citizenry, right? Like their own people on those skills. And it's kind of this whole like penny wise and pound foolish thing. You're going to make an investment in all those other countries, a substantial investment, because you want to save money in the short term. But in the long term, it's causing a lack of education in a lot of those areas in the US. Now, there's tons of great engineers and developers and all sorts of things in the United States. But number one, there's a different cultural mindset, like how we as Americans unfortunately relate to work. When you compare an American employee with an Indian employee, I have to say it, like the Indian employee tends to work harder and put in more effort and put in more time. Americans are becoming fucking entitled, right? They don't want to work. They don't want to work hard. They don't have the same kinds of values. They like to just spend money on things like that don't really matter. The Indians that I knew when I was in the Bay Area growing up, I mean, they would constantly save money. They would be saving money for their kids' education. They'd be sending money back home. They were very smart about their finances, and they were not entitled. They came here. They work. They came to the U.S. They worked really, really hard, like a lot of the Latinos that are in the United States that immigrated there legally as well, right? I mean, either way, but like they're extremely hard workers, and the U.S. has lost a lot of that culture. They're lacking a lot of that training in engineering that you have in places like China. Did you know that? So now, even if you look at like primary school, right, like K through 12 and all that, we're still messing around fighting about bullshit like Common Core math, which does not work.
In the United States.
Yeah, in the U.S. We're teaching in the U.S. We're teaching identity politics. We're basically touting things like transgenderism to children, and we're not focusing on like the basics. What do they need to know? In China, they're not doing any of that shit. Do you know what they're teaching in China? Now, by the time you're 5, 6 years old, you're starting to get an education in China about AI. It's mandatory in all Chinese schools now. Where we're messing around with a bunch of BS. At best, at worst, it's like the identity politics, the stuff that has nothing to do with school. That's people shoving their political agenda down children's throats, and that's awful. Then, best case scenario, what you have is you have these concepts that are all theoretical. Like when I took a couple of years of community college, and I took many classes around development and things like that, even though I'd been studying that on my own for years before, and none of this stuff is relevant. I mean, they have a hard time even putting things in these classes that you still use at all in the workplace anymore. People are coming out of school, they're completely uneducated.
Yeah.
They know a ton about political science, allegedly, which they actually don't because they're just getting brainwashed. But the idea is, okay, they've got this poli-sci background. They know about history. They know about liberal arts. No offense. I know you have a liberal arts degree.
Hey, liberal arts does help with business, okay? It does. You just have to know how to work it. But to your point, most people who get liberal arts degrees don't know how to work it.
Yeah, but even when you look at some of the engineering programs, even some of the top engineering programs, they don't focus on very much of what actually is relevant in the workplace today versus places like China, places like India. They're teaching AI, they're teaching things that are super relevant. So you have lack of training that's embedded into the system. I mean, the US ranks not number one, not number two. Like maybe I think it's in the top 30 or 40 in terms of education systems in the world when it's one of the richest countries. It doesn't make any sense, right? How bad the education in the US is compared to other countries. So you've got lack of education, lack of specialized knowledge, the specialized training programs that have been applied to all these other countries instead of ours because of large corporations like Microsoft that were trying to outsource all that in the 90s and the early 2000s. And then you have culture. And then on top of that, the Americans want to get a lot more money. And understandably so, because they want to live to a certain standard of living that they're accustomed to. So you're paying $120, $130, $150, $160,000 for a decent developer now if you're in the Bay Area or Austin or New York. So why would you do that when you could pay somebody $30,000 or $40,000 less to actually come to America? But now with this bill, what's happening is you got to pay that large salaries still. You got to make sure that they're able to adjust to the U.S. and pay for their living expenses there, even if the Indians and the Chinese and other people that are coming are willing to sacrifice a little bit of that quality of life to come to America. But now you've got that entire $100,000 basically fee on top of that, which is going to discourage a lot of companies. And more importantly, a lot of these foreigners are not really wanting to come to the U.S. anymore anyway. So what that's doing is you're not just affecting the corporations.
Canada has a lot of people from India who are tech workers, and it's all over Instagram how many of them are starting to go back to India.
That's very common,
or other people from Asia who are starting to leave Canada. I know we're talking about the United States, but it happens to be that this has been happening in Canada, that they're starting to go back to Asia because they're like, this doesn't make any sense anymore. Because
it doesn't.
Because in those countries, to your point, I see this going in so many different directions. So let me try and hone it in so we don't go on tangents. But I guess I hear this and I hear this visa bill, and I'm like, to me, it sounds like the United States still thinking like it's the top dog, it's number one of everything in the world.
We're the greatest.
You know, of course.
Number one.
Well, of course they're going to hire Americans because Americans are number one. Or of course people from other countries are going to want to come to the United States for these jobs because we're number one and the companies are just going to have to deal with it. Do you think that's kind of like the mentality?
That's absolutely the mentality. Yeah. And I'm not involved in like politics in the US. I don't have insider information here, right? I mean, this is from my research, this is from my experience, and also from what I've seen in places like Mexico with people getting hired here from all over the world. But what I do know is that this idea that we're like now still the dominant superpower and there's nobody else out there, I think it's using second grade macroeconomic theory on the behalf of the administration and the government to try to bring forth policies. I don't know if this is just incompetence. I don't know if it's ego that is just not guided by like actual truth, or if it's something or if it's something a lot more sinister. I couldn't tell you, right? I'm not here to make opinions about that because I don't know. But what I do know is we're in a multipolar universe. Well,
that's another conversation.
That's another conversation, but we're in a multipolar world, right? We're in a multipolar Earth here. And so you don't just have the United States being this superpower like it was before. China's got a booming economy and a strong military. India is growing. All these other countries are growing. Mexico's economy is growing. It's got one of the fastest growing middle classes right now in the world. So it's not just this like one trick pony where the United States can just bully everybody into submission anymore. It's not that simple.
So is the idea of like, okay, we're going to put this fee on the visa, and I guess we're just like waxing poetic and making assumptions here, but if the damage was done, right? Because a lot of people are saying, oh, well, those jobs never should have gone overseas. The training never should have gone overseas. Okay, but they did it.
It doesn't, that
Okay,
doesn't make a
they,
difference
they did it.
today,
They did it.
right?
Okay, they did it, and they changed the entire world. So how is putting a $100 fee on a visa,
100,000.
$100,000 fee on a visa supposed to make up for the last 20, 30 years of other countries getting trained up in these skills while Americans were not? Like, it just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me, like, kind of what the logic there would be.
And I don't quite understand the logic either. There's a lot of ways to like slice this, right? So on one hand, if you look at just the political ideology, it sounds really good to say, yeah, America first, we're bringing jobs back. And who knows, like maybe some jobs will come back to America, I mean, to the United States, right? But you have to look at the unintended consequences of this. And the unintended consequences is that instead of the majority of those companies paying that fee, they're going to start outsourcing. Where are they going to start outsourcing? Well, they're going to go to India. They've already proven that you can outsource jobs there. Why do they need the Indians to come to the US and work in an office when everything can be done remotely? And if they have issues where they need them to be on the same time zone, and they're not as productive if they're working US time from India or Bangladesh or Pakistan, of course, it's hard to work nights. I've had to do it when I was traveling in Europe and the Middle East and other places where I had clients here, I had to do meetings, I had to do sales calls in US time zones. It's really difficult. So what's the next best thing? Well, I had a whole other video where I talked about this in depth, but they're going to bring those jobs to places like Mexico. There's US companies right now that are starting, and companies from all over the world, even outside of Mexico, that are starting subsidiaries in Mexico, and they're hiring Mexicans, yes, but they're also hiring people from India and China and all these other places, and then they're coming here.
Which is why there's so many Asians moving to Mexico.
Yep.
Which a lot
We're about to start getting some really good pad thai, I think. I hope.
Finally, some good
Fingers
Asian
crossed.
food in Mexico, finally. But
Watch the commenters go off on that one.
Well, anybody who's been in Latin America knows Latin America does not do Asian food well. Okay, so we're hoping, because we started seeing it in Guadalajara, we see Asian markets starting to pop up all over the place in Guadalajara. We see Indian restaurants that were starting to pop up all over the place in Guadalajara. So what you're saying is that these American companies, instead of paying for this visa, they're going to circumvent it by, for example, starting subsidiaries in Mexico and then bringing the people from Asia to Mexico.
Yeah, or just hiring them there. But now that the economy is stable here in Mexico, it's so much easier to get even a foreigner that's not Mexican a visa here in Mexico than it is even pre this bill to get a foreigner a visa in the United States through H1B, that to a lot of companies, it's just going to be a no-brainer.
And then the other thing that I was thinking is, because we do live in more of a multipolar world right now, which I guess the U.S. government, I mean, I guess it doesn't go with the brand of the U.S. government. There's got to be people in the U.S. government who actually know that, but of course they're not going to say that to the general public, because it would probably cause chaos.
And I'll go off on a limb here to piggyback off of what you just said, which is, I think that as much as this is maybe political posturing or wanting to look good for like the policies that this administration is championing, I think as much as that, it's probably in part to show people that, look at us, the government's doing something to protect your jobs. Because to your point, Amanda, if they don't do things like that, then what Americans are going to start to do, as they've already been doing, and this is why many of them are moving here, well, they're going to lose hope, and then that's going to cause them to leave. Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're losing hope because, I mean, I've actually been talking to a few people on LinkedIn as well that have reached out to me that are like looking for jobs and things like that, and I'm sharing their information with recruiters that I'm connected to and whatnot. But there's people out there that I know that are in the U.S. that are amazing software engineers, and they're unemployed right now. Yeah. You think those people randomly are just going to get a job now because there's this $100,000 fine? No. Those jobs it's already done and got. The companies can't even afford to pay them because the cost of doing business in the U.S. is so high. The economy's bad. With inflation, with everything else that's going on economically, it's hard to justify now paying all those people. And they've already been, I mean, between AI, between outsourcing, between all these remote work solutions, they've already been on this path, but this is just like sort of the final nail in the coffin.
And then there's this other piece of the puzzle, which of course this administration is not going to talk about, but there are some very smart geopolitical experts who've talked about this, which is, hey, if you don't have that talent in the United States, then, the United States is known for technology and innovation. And obviously these visas affected that sector more than anybody else. It was really for that sector, this visa. But if you're not getting that talent, okay, well, what if that talent now starts to go to China because China is already nipping at the heels of the United States when it comes to technology and innovation? So while the United States held the number one for and still does for technology and innovation in the world, China's not that far behind.
Absolutely.
In that regard. So now basically you've made it more difficult to hire the talent that is necessary to continue that innovation and continue the growth of that sector. Well, now, I mean, if I was China, I'm not saying I am China, but if I was China, I'd be like, okay, start coming over here then.
Of course.
And
like
that's
they
what
are.
you would do.
Yeah, there's a ton of countries now attracting foreigners. I mean, you look at places like Singapore, for example, a ton of foreign talent there from Asia and from everywhere else. This is causing in a big way a lot of brain drain too, right? Because again, you look at the macroeconomic principles at play here. The fact that they put essentially, so let me use an example. Take a look at the tariffs. Are the tariffs making goods cheaper for Americans? No, they're making them more expensive.
Yeah.
The people that are actually paying the burden of that tax are the taxpayers and the country at large. It's not just, the company's going to pay it, big corporation. They're going to have, no, it's affecting everything globally, because there's no more like isolation anymore. There's no more like, hey, the US is here and nothing that the US does or nothing that other countries do are going to affect the US.
Right. It's not like
the US, the US has a policy. They institute this fine. They think, short-term thinking, again, this is what's gotten us into so much trouble in the United States, but they're like, oh yeah, it's just going to bring the jobs back. Maybe a few of them. It's just like, so it's like the tariffs, right? The tariffs really just affect people, those individuals. They make the cost of goods go up. They affect companies. They hurt them. And then what actually ends up happening? Well, nothing positive. This is the same exact thing. Or another example would be a place like McDonald's, right? That's mandated to have a $25 minimum wage in a place like California, right? They're not paying more people now $25 an hour. They're paying the very few people they absolutely have to keep there that money. And then half the jobs are going to robots. They're automating it. There's machines now between McDonald's and other places that are doing the cooking. They have the automated kiosks.
Right. Because
it's not working.
Because at some point, it's all a math problem.
Yep.
At the end of the day. And if the math isn't mathing, then you have to do something to make the math. It's the same thing that, for example, we see in European countries now, with the United Kingdom now wanting to tax everybody, the millionaires on their worldwide assets. Okay, well,
even if they're not living in the UK.
Even if they're not living in the UK. So what ends up happening? Because it's common sense. It's just a business decision at that point. Well, all those people start to leave the UK. So what you're saying, because, we see a lot of really short-term stupid decisions coming out of Europe too, but that's a video for another time. But at some point, right, it's just the math needs to math. And if the math is not mathing, well, these people are smart. They're just going to go find other options. The people running these companies, they're not going to just take it the same way that the, millionaires in the UK aren't just taking it and they're all leaving in droves, because that's what smart, wealthy people do.
Of course. And this does bring up something a little bit more insidious, which is the people that are for some reason deciding to stay and just saying, well, maybe this policy will make our lives better. Maybe we'll get our jobs back. What they're not realizing is it's sort of like this whole like holding a carrot in front of you thing. The government saying, hey, look at this thing we're doing. Meanwhile, there's all this craziness happening beneath the surface where borders are going to start to get closed. That's what we're seeing. Travel is going to become harder. It's already becoming harder for Americans to open bank accounts overseas in different countries, to get visas, even in a place like Mexico. The residency income requirements have like doubled and tripled from depending on the year you're looking from, but just over the last several years, they've gone up like crazy. I remember when I applied for my Mexican residency, they were only asking for around $2,000 or $3,000 a month. Now it's almost up to $5,000 just for temporary residence. And it's going to go up again by a few percent, maybe 10%, maybe more in January when this new year comes.
And we're seeing many countries doing similar things.
A lot of countries are, because they realize their economies are growing. They don't need that many foreigners. They especially don't need Americans, because there's so many tax complications that come with Americans and reporting requirements to the government and all these other things. They don't want to open bank accounts for them. And they don't want to have Americans, let's say, just coming into their country and changing their culture, right? That's one of the reasons you could argue that places like Asia don't allow citizenship for foreigners in almost all cases, right? They'll grant you temporary or sometimes permanent residence, but they won't give you citizenship in Asia and a lot of places in the Middle East as well. But back to my original point, which is, while little things like this are happening to show you that, oh, maybe it's going to get better in the next couple of years, maybe you're going to get your jobs back. All of these other countries now, and this you could argue would be a reason for them to be doing it, is to just sort of keep people pacified.
Yeah.
So, hey, we're going to give you this little thing. By the way, the dollar is weakening. The peso is getting stronger every single day compared to the dollar. Now it's at like 18.3 pesos per dollar. It was at 21 right when AMLO was finishing his term. There's restrictions for immigration. Now the U.S. is pushing things like CBDCs. There's other countries obviously doing this as well. But that digital ID, they're trying to get you all surveilled and everything into the system. And it's like, okay, is this going to make life better for the average American or worse? And long term, and not only is it going to get worse, but it's this like boiling frog thing where you're only really able to feel the heat of the water around you when it's too late.
Well, I think a lot of Americans are feeling the heat with the cost of living.
They're starting to, but not enough to actually jump and move overseas.
Yeah.
Even the ones that can, somehow there's a lot of them that are still staying. And I'm curious why. Like, why are you guys still staying in the U.S.?
Well, there's emotional things. There's family. There's connections. There's, loose ends.
But at least getting a second passport, at least getting a second residency, at least getting a second bank account somewhere outside.
Ones do that.
They're starting to, but not all of them.
Ones do that.
Yeah, it's only going to get worse. And it's going to get better eventually. I do think so. I think maybe in 20, 30 years, the U.S. might start to get better. I don't know that, but it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And if you're not ready to ride that wave, if you're not ultra wealthy, and you just like putting up with, in San Francisco, people pooping on the streets, if you enjoy that, and you really want to stay in the Bay Area, like, okay, more power to you. But the situation in the U.S. is getting worse and worse. The situation in Canada is getting worse and worse. And I just think things like this are designed to distract people from what's really happening and from their lowering, now the diminishing ability that the average American has to be able to get a second passport, to be able to get a second residency. Even some of the wealthy clients that we work with, they're realizing we can't retire on $2 or $3 million in the U.S. anywhere decent, but we definitely can in Mexico. Still, that is possible, and they're taking action, and they're finally starting to come here more and more.
And then they come to Mexico
before it's too late.
And then they come to Mexico, get the immigration done, so they have that residency in
their back pocket. Yep.
Because Mexico is one of the countries that does allow you to do that. There's a couple others, but Mexico is one of the most well-known ones. And then they come to Mexico, and what's the first thing they start asking us? We just had clients here, and they're like, oh my gosh, the growth here is crazy.
Yeah, they want to buy real estate. They want to invest.
Real estate. They want to invest because they see how Mexico is having a growth economy in comparison to what's going on in the United States. And the final point, because you brought up, Asia and the Middle East, and I don't know if a lot of Americans know this, right, is the Middle East is also pumping a lot of money into tech and finance. So
absolutely. The Middle East is Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They're putting tons of money into technology. They're turning these deserts into data centers.
Yeah, so now what's going to
happen? They're planting data centers everywhere.
So now the talent, so then they could do a play as well in the Middle East and be like, hey, talent, it just got a lot harder for you to go to the United States. Why don't you start coming over here, over to the Gulf
States? And they already are. They're making it easy for people to start businesses there.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is like, your theory of this whole thing is like, it's a giant distraction to keep Americans pacified.
I don't know what Trump's thinking, right? I don't know what Trump's thinking. I don't know what the administration's trying to do. I genuinely believe there's a chance, again, and this is because I'm a little bit of an old soul, perhaps. Like maybe they're trying to do the right thing, and maybe it's guided by genuinely trying to help the American people. I think that's a possibility. Do I think that's likely? I don't know. It's like 50-50 maybe.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a part there that actually is genuinely trying to do something to help the economy for whatever reason that may or may not also be politically motivated, but that's okay. Like maybe there's something there where they're like, we want to help people. We think this will help people. But that doesn't mean that the math is going to math.
Yeah.
And that's what's really important in all this. Is it actually going to work? Does it follow sound macroeconomic policy? And I don't see the tariffs working. I don't think this is going to work.
Well, they've what's the word? They've extended the tariffs on China like a bunch of
The
times by
deadlines,
now, the
yeah.
deadlines and
Wow.
all that, because China's playing ball.
Well, they're already, I mean,
Right.
now it's already cheaper for us to buy things, a lot of electronics, to buy them in Mexico, shipped directly from China than it is to buy them in the US
Because
of all the tariffs and the speculation about the tariffs, which is significantly increasing the cost of all of these different parts throughout the supply chain.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, like whenever we would go to the United States, it was known that technology, it was cheaper to buy tech things in the United States than Mexico. And
By a
now,
lot.
by a lot. And now because of the tariffs, we're starting to see the reverse on some things. So that's an interesting thing that's happening as well. Yeah, the tariffs haven't seemed to work out the way that he wanted them to. But again, it just goes back to that idea of, you know, this may not be sound economic policy for the world that we're living in right now. And that seems to be the
I don't think
missing
it
variable.
is. Yeah,
That's the
I think
missing
it's
variable.
I think it's either that the people that are in charge in the US genuinely still somehow believe that we're living in that unipolar world and they're acting based on that, assuming that they are taking the interests of the US population into account, which is arguable, right? But let's give them the benefit of the doubt there and say that that's option one, which is that they're genuinely taking that into account, but they're operating from a misguided point of view that may have been true 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, but isn't true today. And then option two is that either it's a deflection and or what they're doing is they're trying to keep the US public believing that we're living in that unipolar world and that America is still the best.
But we're
And
not.
that's why this makes sense.
Right.
That's why otherwise there's no way for them to justify that. Does that make sense? So it's almost like a little bit of reverse psychology. Oh, we're going to do this thing because it's going to bring back jobs. And if you believe that it's going to bring back jobs, that means that your level of thinking around macroeconomics as it relates to the US is that of that unipolar, we're the best, we're on top, blah, blah, blah. And so it keeps them in the narrative of believing that themselves. That's another option. And I think those are the only two real sides of that coin that make any sense, personally. Yeah.
Well, thank you, because I really wanted your opinion on this. You know, you having, you know, run businesses from multiple countries, you having managed tech teams from multiple countries, being from the Bay Area, which seems to be the epicenter of this whole thing. And you've been seeing this stuff your entire life. And also just what we've been seeing just from living and traveling in other countries, like, oh, hold on, wait a second. This math is not going to work out probably the way that you think it's going to work out. And for those of you who are interested, Justin did do another video where he actually taught companies how to circumvent that visa by hiring people through Mexico, which we're probably going to see a lot more companies doing. So thank you guys so much for giving us your time today. Many of you have been asking about these visa policies and things like this, so we just wanted to bring this conversation to you. Once again, if you have over $1 million in liquid net worth, we can help you with relocation, investment opportunities, real estate, you name it. Just go to entrepreneurexpat.com/consult. That's also for those of you who have businesses that are over 7 figures and you may need to figure out how to move abroad. But you got to figure out the issue. You got to figure out the business first in order to be able to more easily move abroad, whether it's selling it or putting management in place or moving it online. You guys can use that link as well. And if you do not meet that requirement, don't worry, we have a ton of resources for you. Make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel because all the content here is free. We try and bring as much educational stuff to you guys as possible. In addition to that, we have a lot of resources in the description, anywhere from free guides to courses that you can take, courses that will help you move to the country that makes the most sense for you, because Mexico makes sense for us right now. Doesn't mean it makes sense for you, the viewer, based on your situation, all the way to, you know, how do you make more money online so you can qualify for visas all over the world. Thank you so much for giving us your time today, and we'll catch you on the next one.